We're here because free speech is under attack. We're here because people are being convinced that socialism works. We're here because people are being judged guilty until proven innocent. We are fighting back with facts. This is not a safe zone, so buckle up, Buttercup. This is the raw, naked truth.
Welcome to the Raw Naked Truth. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin, and we've got consumer confidence down. We've got inflation and interest rates up, and we've got the R word that the Biden administration doesn't want to hear, and that's recession. It's been a big week for the economy. We've been talking about it all week. And to wrap up the week, we've got Wallet Watch contributor Chris Calandra from Elliott Financial. Chris, how you doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me. And we could probably talk about this stuff for hours. There's just so much going on, Eric.
Yeah, it's been a ridiculous week. Nothing has gone the way the Biden administration wanted things to go. And they spent a good part of the week sort of trying to spin what was going on.
Yes, they are trying to go on offense, if you'll allow me to use that term, with trying to get some legislation agreements with compromise with Joe Manchin in the Senate. There's the CHIPS Act. They try to get ahead of the bad GDP number and talk about it not being a recession. They really try to be proactive this week. I question whether it will really change the narrative. But they did put forth a pretty good effort this week.
Yeah, their big focus on the spin is that 2 down quarters does not make a recession. And of course, any reputable economist will tell you, well, that's pretty much the definition of a recession. And in fact, the New York Post in today's paper printed the Webster's definition of recession, which was 2 down quarters of GDP. So no matter what he's saying, people know what they're seeing when they go shopping, when they fill up their tanks. They know what they're feeling. Inflation has been rising faster than wage gains. And something had been mentioned yesterday as pundits were discussing this. Biden keeps pointing to, well, we've got strong job numbers. We've got strong job numbers. In fact, right now, we have 3 million fewer people working than we did before the start of the pandemic.
Yes, I think, it is, I'll disagree a little bit, Eric. It is true that it is weird that we have a recession. And I agree, everybody accepted that a recession was defined as 2 consecutive quarters of net growth up until about 5 seconds ago. And I've been in the business 30 years. It was always that. And so we have this recession. What is weird is that usually a recession is accompanied by a weak job market. And I agree with you about there still being a hole left from the pandemic. But I believe, and I think you would agree with this is a pretty good job market. If you want to get a job or you want to change jobs, it's a very good environment. Unemployment's at 3.5%. It certainly isn't a weak job market. Is it the greatest one ever? No. Are we still dealing with a hangover from the pandemic? Yes. But we've increased payrolls on average 457,000 a month so far this year. That's pretty strong. It's again a little weird that we have such a good labor market combined with a recession that's driven by a lot of economic upheaval, with inflation really being a problem.
Yeah, the labor market is in a very strange place because, yes, if you want a job, you can find a job. They're out there. However, the participation rate has been dropping. So
Yes.
people are actually leaving the job market. And on top of that, while the job market has been relatively strong, I would say for the last year or so, over the last 6 weeks, we've seen a slew of announcements from companies saying they are freezing hiring. They are laying people off now. So I think the strength of the job market is starting to wane.
Agreed.
And the GDP, down for the last 2 quarters. All right, that's that lagging indicator, but let's see what the job market's going to do in the next few months, because I don't think it's going to be as strong as the administration wants it to be.
Yes, I agree with that. And I'll point your listeners and you too to something called the misery index, which became very popular in the 1970s. The traditional and most common definition of this is if you take the unemployment rate and you add into it the inflation rate, that combined sum total is the misery index. And this was created in an attempt to measure the degree of economic stress that everyday Americans are encountering. And it hasn't really been talked about much over this low interest rate, low inflation period we've been in for almost a generation. But to your point, if inflation stays stubbornly high, maybe even if it doesn't increase, but just stays stubbornly high, if you get unemployment rates going in the other direction and that misery index either stays where it is or increases, it becomes a very important issue in the country, this misery index. And from the political standpoint, I know that's not a political segment, but when the misery index is high, the incumbent party, especially the incumbent party in the White House, usually is in trouble politically. You don't want that number to be high, and it is very high now, higher than it's been in a very long time, and it might go still higher.
Yes, it doesn't matter which party you belong to. When misery is high, the party in power gets blamed. Doesn't matter if it's the Democrats or Republicans, whoever's in charge takes the blame. And to be fair, whether or not they deserve it, they take the blame. So that's gone on historically. And talking about inflation, when the GDP numbers came out, the email summary that the Bureau of Economic Analysis sends out specifically stated that the reason, or one of the reasons, that GDP only went down 0.9% compared to the 1.6% in the first quarter was because government spending decreased. So on the same day that you have that announcement come out, the House passes the CHIPS Plus spending bill, and Manchin comes to an agreement for a scaled back, build back better, all increasing government spending by almost $1 trillion combined. So the economists have stated GDP the loss wasn't worse because of less government spending. So how did the Democrats respond? 2 massive spending bills.
Yeah, I think, my personal view is that's a policy mistake. I believe you agree. But let's set that aside. Even if you believe it's good legislation and you're hoping it passes, I think you'd have to admit it is contradictory to what the Federal Reserve is trying to do. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates. They've raised interest rates 4 times so far for a total of 2.25 percentage points. This week, they raised it 0.75, which is a pretty big jump. And it's the second one in a row that was 0.75%. They're trying to slow down the velocity of money, slow down economic activity to fight inflation. And their primary role, the Federal Reserve, is to try and maintain price stability. We don't have price stability now. The Federal Reserve is behind the curve. How do you know they're behind? Because they're raising at 0.75 a clip, acknowledging that they are behind. So the Federal Reserve is trying to do this. If the federal government continues to pump more money into the system through this and other legislation, you actually have the Federal Reserve, which is very powerful, and the federal government, which of course is very powerful, acting at cross odds. And it's really problematic that they are not working in concert with one another, because it may increase the economic harm that is happening. It's widely accepted, I believe, that what the federal government did during the pandemic, pumping all kinds of money into the system, has led to or contributed greatly to inflation. Is Putin part of it? Yes. Is supply chain interruptions part of it? Yes. But the biggest factor has been the enormous amount of government spending, putting so much money into the system, created inflation. How much money, Eric, by the way, in the last 2 years, the money supply, the amount of money in circulation has grown by 18% per year. So that's a total, simple math, Eric, 36%. That means for every $3 you have in your pocket, one of them has been created in the last 2 years. And all of that money in play with challenges in supply chain is creating inflation. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. Well, we put all this money in play and we have an increased supply. In many instances, supply has shrunk or has difficulty getting to go in time. And it seems crazy for the Biden administration to want to pump more money in. And this is a political statement, Eric, the Biden administration has no other solution. They have no other solutions that they put forth other than throw money at problems. And that in and of itself, I think, is a problem generally, but especially today in the inflationary environment the country finds itself.
Now, it is a major problem. And that's the statement you've made is not just a political statement, because prior to the American Rescue Act, Barack Obama's chief economist told Joe Biden that that amount of spending was going to supercharge inflation. The bill that the Democrats are now trying to get past the House and Senate, the scaled down Build Back Better, includes increased taxes. Well, Barack Obama himself, when he was in office, stated you don't raise taxes during a recession. And that was why he didn't raise taxes early on in his presidency. So it's not just a political statement. The Democrats know this. And in fact, let's face it, Obama is not considered a centrist Democrat. He's more to the left. And he is the one who has said this. His administration said this. So we know this is going to be detrimental. There was a line from The Simpsons where they flash back to Ned Flanders' childhood, and he was an out-of-control child. His parents were beatniks. And they said to the doctor, "We've tried nothing, and we're all out of ideas." and that's basically the situation that the administration's in now.
And I think, my personal opinion is this policy prescription is less about improving the economy. Now, this may be jaded, and supporters of the Biden administration and the Democrats may disagree with me, but this is more about trying to stem the coming election losses. And it's more about vote getting than good economic policy. The optics that they're trying to create, that they're doing something, that they're fulfilling campaign promises, is what they're trying to do. They are, in my opinion, not trying to put forth good economic policy based on the circumstances we find ourselves in today. It's simply about trying to make November's election results better for the Democrats. And that's kind of a shame. And that's a little jaded, but I think I'm right.
I think you're right too. I know a lot of other people think you're right. AOC told Joe Biden point blank that if he doesn't start doing things for the progressive wing, they're going to stay home in November. I think that's what this is about. It's about trying to fulfill some of that progressive wish list so that progressives turn out in November and try to at least hold on to the Senate, it doesn't look like the Democrats have any chance of holding on to the House. So yes, unfortunately, politics is part of this, where this is a bread and butter issue that is affecting every American. And something that I absolutely find hysterical is the constant redefinition. And he's been trying to convince people that this is not a recession. But let's take a look at what he said in the past. I mean, this is the same guy that said the withdrawal from Afghanistan was a rousing success. People know that he is not telling the truth, essentially, and pundits have said this on both sides of the aisle. He's essentially trying to say, don't believe your own eyes, believe what we're telling you.
Yes, I agree with that. It seems, though, that this embellishment that goes on, and all politicians do it. I mean, Trump was the master of it. Everything was the greatest, the biggest, all of that stuff. But if you believe the polling and you believe that America is largely in a sour mood when it comes to the economy, which I believe is a good adjective to use, a sour mood, they're kind of not buying it. And even this debate of, is it a recession? Is it not a recession? Is the economy the envy of the world? I mean, the spokesperson has, said some really unusual things. It's kind of hard to take it seriously. But do you really think it's going to change America's outlook and change the sentiment, the sour mood, trying to argue, hey, we're not really in a recession, when everybody knows inflation's red hot and interest rates are going up and the economy is weakening? And you start to see a little bit of weakness in the job market. There's just so much polling, Eric, so much data across a wide spectrum that indicates that the economy is not very healthy. It's not a disaster, but not very healthy. And that's why Americans seem unhappy with the Biden administration. And it's not just Republicans. Independents have left their support for Biden behind, and even Democrats. We still get a majority of support from Democrats, but historically you're in the high 80s of support from your party, and he's way below that. So the administration's trying to do it, but it doesn't seem like it's very successful because Americans don't seem to be buying it.
Yeah, the bottom line of it is, it doesn't matter what you call it. It matters what the American people see and feel. That's what's going to decide elections. That's what's going to decide the fate of the economy and the administration. And that's the raw, naked truth. Chris, thanks for being here this week. You can catch Raw Naked Truth every episode at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and any platform that respects freedom of speech. We'll see you next time.